really recognizing where we are located. Shelley and I are both located in Surrey, as you saw in the chat there, and specifically on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Squaxin First Nations. We're grateful to be on this land and to be able to connect with you on this land, and especially as we talk about our experiences as BIPOC folks, it's important to understand the history of the land in which we are able to connect on in this moment. And this also relates to our history of our name and how we got started doing this work, creating these spaces to have these conversations. So the way we engage is through the name Kaiso Careers. And what we want to do is really create a place for BIPOC folks to be able to connect, talk, share about creating what success looks like to us, what our professional space looks like to us, and sharing our unique perspectives. And the reason we called it Kaiso Careers is because Shelley and I are both from Trinidad and Tobago, home of Calypso and Soca and Carnival and many other things. But when we were looking at what was going to be important to represent who we are, the word Kaiso really represented the evolution of music in Trinidad and Tobago, and the evolution of a music that was fused with the many different cultures that were there. And that really represents who we are and who we want to support, with influences of chutney, of soul, of funk, of Latin, of Calypso. You know, all of these things come together to define who we are as a culture, as a Trinidadian culture, but also who we are in this land in Canada. So it was important for us to have that be a piece of our name and invite you into that. So at this time, we also want to recognize how we're coming into this space. Since our last session a month ago, there's been several things that have happened that have had an impact on our community as BIPOC folks. There's, you know, continued rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. The Derek Chauvin trial began, and I must say it began on my birthday, and I didn't even recognize what an impact it was for that to happen on my birthday and then continue through the week with that. And, you know, we have another incident of a Black man being shot by police officers in the US, and I'm sure, you know, many other things that we can name and call out. And so we wanted to provide a space to check in. You know, this is a place for us to connect, and part of that connection is, you know, attending to how we're feeling in the moment. So we wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing, what is sitting with you during this time, as we're connecting in this space for BIPOC folks. What's on your mind at this moment? How are you responding or reacting to the things that are happening in the world at the moment? So I'm going to give you a moment to share what your thoughts are in the chat, and just witness for others how others might be feeling and coming into this space together. So give us a moment of silence to share what's happening in the chat.
And while people are just thinking about their thoughts and reflecting on the most recent events that have been going on, the other thing that Shalima and I talked about when we were thinking about why we wanted to do this type of work was the importance of creating these spaces where community members could come in and really have these open and honest conversations and not feel like they're being silenced or muted. So that's part of why we said, you know what, we want to create these spaces where we can have these full conversations and really amplify the voices of so many BIPOC folks that are doing great work within our community. So that's just also a little bit of the background as to what we're doing here in this space. Let's see, people are feeling definitely heavy, reflective, pensive. I know for myself, some of the thoughts that have gone on are just yeah, exhausted. I would say exhausted for sure. And thinking about how can we support one another, right? I saw an interesting post on LinkedIn, and it was just a good reminder to many people who are in leadership that that are that are not necessarily BIPOC, to just understand that BIPOC folks, in particular, Asian folks, Black folks, are going through such heavy times right now. So to give them time to, you know, sometimes rest when they need to during these heavy and exhausting times. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to that point, Shirley, I think sometimes it's recognizing that we also, like, we need rest. You know, recognizing that sometimes when you're in the midst of it and don't have time to think fully and fully reflect or fully digest everything that's going on, it can impact you in small ways that you might not even recognize. So really taking that time, giving yourself permission to take care of yourself during times like this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to the next one there, Shalima. Yeah, so we want to welcome our two guests that we have here today. We've got Ms. Angela Cook, who's the Vice President of Operations at BC Housing, and she's been in the field for over 25 years in social housing field, in the whole social housing field. And this is just a tip of the iceberg for what Angela can offer and to the conversation. Shalima and I mentioned to Angela earlier on that we did a little extra digging on her background, and it's really phenomenal. And we know that these bios are just a short snippet as to what our guests can bring to the conversation. So we're excited to dive a little deeper into the conversation with Angela. And then we've got Del Friday, who's the Associate Director, Gift and Estate Planning at UBC. She also has her own private practice, and she's a proud mom of two amazing boys. And again, when we think of, so Shalima, full disclosure, Shalima and I have known Del, well, for most of our lives. So Del and Shalima have known each other for all of Shalima's life. And then Del and I have known each other for most of my life as well. And so we also know a great deal of great other tidbits about Del, and we thought she would lend so much richness to this conversation as well. To start off, we were taking a moment to reflect on what's been going on globally. And with that in mind, we want to understand from your perspectives as Black women who are navigating your career journeys, how has the recent events really impacted you when we think about that? And also, as Black women in your careers, which are really strong where you are, you're in your professionalism, what has this journey been like as Black women taking the lead in your careers? So whoever'd like to jump in first, go for it.
Well, okay, I can start. I find I'm at an interesting point in my career. I've been in law for almost 20 years and been all kinds of different places, like all types of different firms. Right now, I find myself in some ways like back to the start. So back at UBC and also in my own practice. And what is also interesting is that when I started law school and what drove me into law school, one of the things was police shootings. And so it's this, and diversity and inclusion, because in the 90s, that was a big thing. And I don't know if anyone remembers, but also in the 90s, there was a young man, and I wish I could remember his name. He was in Montreal and he was shot by the police. And so that was one of the first times that I got interested in this type of work. But then 2000 happened and the whole like politically correctness movement started. And I realize now, looking back, that I came to just almost completely separate myself and my work. And I stopped doing inclusion work and other than like in my own career in small ways, I stopped participating in that type of work outwardly. And I just got down to like doing my work and trying to survive in corporate, legal corporate field space. And now I've reached a part in my career where like the potential to do that work has opened up again, and it's really interesting. So I'm just trying to look at what I could do. I don't know if Angela's had similar experiences that way with seeing how it's changed the workplace.
Thank you, Del. So firstly, I would like to share with the group, part of the thing that has motivated me in my career has been my lived experience. So I'm going to share a little bit of my personal journey with you. So I didn't grow up in a traditional household environment. So I actually grew up in a group home. And so obviously at the age of 18, when obviously your journey comes to an end in that system, obviously I was in a situation where I was homeless, a teen mum with 2 children. And one of the things that really kind of inspired me was getting my education, because I knew that that was going to be something that was going to obviously give me the platform to be able to do better in life. And I knew, just based on seeing some of the services that are provided to people of colour and Indigenous people, that, you know, we deserved to receive better services than we were getting. And I decided that, you know, I wanted to be one of those individuals that joined the community and social services sector, so that I could be part of the system to ensure that I was the voice and was able to advocate and champion for people who are vulnerable and marginalised. And I started on the front lines, and I have been able to work my way up to where I am now. I am able to resonate with the things that are going on in relation to George Floyd and some of the other cases, because I myself am one of those mothers. And so I, you know, share, you know, a lot of their pain. I understand exactly what they are going through. And so for us as a community, I know that the struggle to try and achieve equity and equality is real, and the profound impact and trauma that these situations keep having on families, the length and breadth of the country in North America and around the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. And thanks, Del, for sharing, you know, your transition as well. And what's interesting here is both of you are mothers, right? And Del, I know you have some young boys, and you talked about how your career is now opening up space to do a bit more of the D&I work. And Angela, you started off in this career with children. And I'm curious how your children have also help shape your thoughts around career and who you are in the workplace as well.
So I think that obviously my children were my biggest motivator. I had, you know, 2 individuals that I had to take care of. And I think that, you know, if it wasn't for them, that I would possibly wouldn't have pushed myself as much as I have done in terms of taking chances and risks, in terms of going for other opportunities that have presented themselves. And I really think certainly for, you know, children that are growing up right now, it is really challenging for them to take a look at how they're going to be the next future generation of leaders, given some of the systemic barriers that they're facing in schools, and as they try to kind of navigate the career world, knowing that ourselves, as we try and navigate employment, we receive a lot of pushback and a lot of difficult work environments. So I would certainly say that, you know, my children motivate me, and I do spend a lot of time, you know, talking to them, and I have over the years around the impacts of how, you know, the challenges of Black people can affect us in our career journey.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll hand it over to Belle now.
Yeah, having children, and I've had my children late in my career. I was 42 when my first child was born. It's interesting because I think that it became like one more layer and barrier on my career, more than I expected. And so I would describe like being a mom of young children in a workplace, especially during COVID. Like, I have many luxuries that lots of people don't have. So I have a mother that helps me with my children most days, and I usually have a part-time nanny, and like all the things that, you know, it's somewhat privileged to have a nanny and not to be relying on daycare. And yet, like I saw my career trajectory just as soon as it was the second child, the first child, maybe not as much. Second child, it became very obvious that it was going to be very difficult to move through the bureaucracy of UBC, navigating as both a mother and a child, with a mother with two small children, even though the UBC would say that it holds itself as one of the best employers for working mothers. But there's just like barrier after barrier that you don't even like just start to you look and you see like, oh, is this about my Blackness? Is this about me being a mother? Is this about like there it's just things that are slowly limiting you, and it's like these little tiny cuts. um you know, like an occasional comment about mat leave where someone describes it as a vacation when like especially on my second mat leave, um, I spent 3 months at home with my one child, and then I spent um, 2 months in the hospital with my eldest child while he was getting chemo. So like that is no vacation. And then I came back to work early because the fact is I at the time was the primary breadwinner, and so we needed my income. Um, Now, these experiences aren't limited to me. You know, it's not a matter of me being a person of color, and this is happening too. But it was like one more thing, and it was one more thing to navigate. And so when you then have issues of race do come up, or if I I describe like the Canadian workplace is not so overtly racist that you can put a finger at something and say like this is because I was black. It is a process of like getting excluded from like you're overly qualified and yet no one ever wants to use your qualifications. Like, you know, you're just not invited, right? It's a continuous otherness of always being the other. And there's always a reason why you're excluded, and it's never terrible and it's never a bad reason. Um, but it's just like a subtlety. In law, in law, in law, like forget it. It's easy to see in law. Like you are not a male man married with a mortgage. Like they look for it, they call it triple M, male married mortgage. I am not triple M in any way. And like by male, they don't mean black men, like, please. They're looking for white men. And and law was very plain on their exclusion. Like I worked at a firm where actually all the firms I worked at, there were no working moms in these firms that worked full time. There was like occasional part-time lawyers that didn't seem to be like real lawyers. There, the lawyers who worked were either single women or they were men, and most of the men were married and had wives that would help them and were supporting them in the house. Um, and and we worked such long hours that I can't even imagine being a mom and doing that work. Like it would be a disaster for me. And so, yeah, so I find it very difficult to unpackage all the things. I like to say to my boss, yeah, find me as you find me. Like here I am, middle-aged Black woman who has some chips on her shoulders, who's a little bit sensitive to all this stuff, who does not want to explain Blackness to my coworkers in any way. I'm tired of that. And who has two small kids and who has a multi-generational house, and like I'm complicated and I'm overly qualified for your job. And yet here I am. So work with me. And yeah, it's taken me a long time to get to that point.
And I think I agree with you, Dal, in terms of, you know, when we navigate the workplace, you know, one of the things that I found quite profound when I moved here to Canada is that, you know, it's always very difficult to kind of quite put your finger on some of the treatment that you're experiencing. And even though we know what it is, it's not overt. And it is little things, as you say, like being excluded from emails or from meetings, or not being asked to participate, or, you know, you make a suggestion and it's shut down, and you know it's the right thing that you might be putting forward. And I think as certainly, you know, Black women and as Black people, what that starts to do over time is to really erode people's confidence and to question, you know, do I have the skill set? You know, am I smart enough to be, you know, with these people? And you know, I think there needs to certainly be a recognition in society of the impacts of the trauma that as a community that we face whilst we're trying to obviously do our work and to earn an income and to obviously achieve our successes in our careers.
I think too, we start to overwork.
Yes.
Because we're told we have to, you know, you're told very subtly that you need to, like, there's these unwritten targets that are a little bit higher than everybody else's, or that, you know, like sometimes I do think we put it on ourselves in some ways too, right? No one's going to recognize me if I don't do it twice as good as, you know, the average white man. Like, we'd like put these things on us, and it becomes heavy and unattainable. And yeah, I just find the overt racism I can deal with, right? Like that doesn't scare me at all. Like not even a little bit, right? That's the part I wish things would be so much more open. It's the questioning of my ability in very subtle ways. And it's usually, I see it often in law and in the work I do fundraising as almost because you don't have access, you shouldn't have access. So I would take it as like, oh, you didn't grow up in Kerrisdale, and so you don't know these big donors, and would they feel comfortable with you? And like, you know, like it's all these things. And then what's interesting, I find, is being someone who is sometimes ethnically ambiguous, I would say, right? Especially to white folks may look at me and say, what are you? Like they don't quite know. And, you know, most Black people would recognize me as Black, but most white people do not. Or they don't know, they just know, but it's still an issue, right? So it's still like, and I think for me, one of the biggest guttings this year was the treatment of Meghan Markle and her child. And I was like, are we still on the drop issue? Because to me, she looks so white. And she looks very, and you would think if anyone is blending in and moving through, and I feel like that's what people put on me sometimes, is that like, you don't even look Black, Del. Like you hardly look. And so like, why are you like always having to justify actions that I see as racist? We have an, I wouldn't say it's not an incident at UBC, but there's stuff happening in my department where it's becoming obvious that they need diversity and inclusion project. And I spoke up and said, like, we need to do something about this. Like you're saying you're this, and it actually looks like that. And I feel like then I have to justify, because people can't, even white people can't believe that this is still happening, or that systems are set up to fail. And like those, but we didn't even know that, like they try, but you're no different than us. Like, well, you know, like it's so subtle that it actually becomes quite painful to have, you almost feel re-traumatized every time I have to explain to somebody why I think something is racist. And it reminds me so much of Meghan Markle when she's saying like she's saying something racist happened, and then the press is saying like she's being ridiculous. So it's that he said, she said type thing that I think is what happens in Canada. That is actually sometimes, yeah, that it can be so painful in your career. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, you've taken us through quite the experiences that, I'm resonating exactly, with what you're sharing about what it's like. And, one of the things that really struck me and what's come up here is this confidence piece. And so sometimes it could be that motivator, but then it ends up being that I might go over and above in order to feel like I'm proving that I have the right to be there, right?
Well, the superwoman complex, right? Wearing the cape.
Exactly. And, when we take on that much, we're telling ourselves that we don't have a right to be there when we do, right? And, that constant having to prove to myself or feeling like I'm doing that. And then those subtle things that can make you question externally what is being perceived in your actions, your behaviors, that second guessing of how things are, what's actually happening, what are the real dynamics, what's really at play. So yeah, a lot of that has resonated. I'm curious, like, what would you give as advice to people going through this? Well, we have to look to your wisdom, right?
My experiences. I think one thing that I have learned to do, and I don't know who taught me this, but is that I look for my next opportunity. I don't depend on people asking me or setting up, like, because I'll see colleagues who it appears, I don't know what's going on there, but this is what I see from my eyes, that like they're given one opportunity, they do really, really well in it. And then a next opportunity appears and they go for it and they get it. And then the next opportunity appears. And that has not been my experience. And so what I have always done is like a lateral step. And like sometimes I step up and sometimes I step a little bit back. But this is the first job I remember saying to my boss, and it's probably only because of all the mat leaves, was that I had never had a job for 6 years. This is the first time I've been in one employer for 6 years. I have always moved myself up by going to a different employer and trying to find a step up. And so I think that we're quite capable of creating our own paths. I probably don't ask for help enough and probably could have gone to any of those employers and said like, hey, I'm bored, I need a new job. It's been 2 years. Time for me to get a raise, time for me to, but I've never known how to do that. And so I've always just gone to the next place and found myself something and just tried to create my own career path. And I think it's actually worked for me. So at this point in my career, I know that I could go and do lots of jobs that I thought where they wouldn't hire me. Like if I wanted to go to Bay Street now or work in like a New York firm, or why I'd ever want to do any of those jobs. But if I wanted to do those jobs, the things I thought I wanted to do coming out of school, they're available now. So there's something about just hanging in there.
Yeah, so I think for me, the advice that I would give is, never stop chasing your dream. Certainly for me, that's a value that I've always held on to. I've had, like Del, some organizations where I've stayed for quite a long time, and I've been really fortunate that they have seen my skill and my expertise and valued that, and they've almost like nurtured and grown me as a person. But then I've also been in organizations where, like you say, you work in the long hours, you feel like, you're being, not valued, and, you fight to stay in that organization because you want to contribute and you want to have an equal seat at the table, if you like, with the rest of your colleagues. And, I've had situations where I've said, something, I don't think that this organization is serving me. And in order for me to get to where I want to go, I have to make decisions for myself that will allow me to land at a place where I can do my best work, be my authentic self. So I think it depends on the situation and then on the circumstance, and how I try and address some of the challenges that we're facing as a community. Given the fact that, you know, I am a senior executive and have been for quite a long time, I'm able to go into organizations and to leverage my ethnicity and my race to start to diversify those organizations, and to open the door and to provide opportunities to people who are in my community who for years may have been struggling to get those jobs and those roles that, quite rightly, if we were to, for example, take out their names and their addresses and you would look at their resumes, would be just as capable as any other candidate that was applying for those roles. And so now I, you know, work with specialist organizations that help prepare people from the BIPOC community to be ready when opportunities come forward, so that they don't have to go through the traditional job navigation process and they pretty much arrive straight at interview, so that they are on their way to being able to get one of the opportunities that we may be hiring for.
Oh, I have one more advice that was given to me. So when I was a young lawyer, I met this woman from California who had her own firm. And she said to me, she said in her community, she was one of the first Black lawyers, like the school she'd gone to, Black women lawyers. And she said, always have a little piece that you make yourself that depends on no one else, that you can. So she did estate work, and which has always been now a big part, ever since I met her, a big part of my portfolio is that to have something that I can go find those clients and I have access to them. I can control the work product. I can make it myself if I need to, or I can hire someone else to make it for me. And I can finish the product, get paid. And she said that that advice had always stuck with me, that I needed to always be able to control my client base, because quite often in law, I see this a lot with women, and probably just because there's not a lot of women in color. I don't know if it's most women of color, where we become the helper lawyer. This is a role that's often very available to women, is to step in to be a supportive role. And so we're standing and supporting. I've worked for lawyers where I'm working on huge files, like, I used to do tax work for the 1%, basically, right? So my clients would have, millions and millions, $50 million that were moving around and moving into different companies and doing all this stuff. I always still would have a little will on the side, because, and it always proved true, was those were not my clients. I did not have the relationship with the actual client. Even if I was even going to their house and knowing them, it was still very obvious these are not my clients. And so I've always liked the idea of controlling my own destiny in some way that's possible, to hold on to something that I can do myself. Um, in my experience, and this is probably not a popular thing to say, but D&I work, like, oh, like it's hard work. It's often not paid well. And I see a lot of burnout. And frankly, I'm very happy that I did not early in my career focus on writing injustices and like really big work, because I don't think I would still be a lawyer. I have seen so many people burn out. There's sometimes the pay inequity of some of my colleagues that went into that work, where, like when I was a young student, they had the African Canadian Legal Clinic in Toronto, and the pay was terrible and the work was amazing. But the pay was student loans to pay. And we don't come from rich families often. And, and it was like one more thing added. And so like, at some point in my career, I was like, I don't want to spend my career educating white people, and I don't want to spend my career trying to right injustices. And maybe I would have been talented at that, but at some point I just want to make some money. And and like, I'm happy to support people doing that work, and I'm happy to give them some money, because to me, that can also be a gift that we often overlook. Like, I want to do well in my retirement. And so I want the jobs, like I don't see Chad applying for the D&I officer position, right? I don't want it. If Chad doesn't want it, I don't want it. I want to make some good money.
So I love that you share that.
It's
Yeah,
kind of
right?
embarrassing to say.
No, but I think it's a reality that traditionally D&I positions are held by women of color, and traditionally they have been paid at the lowest rate. And they're taking the brunt of the system. They're told that they're responsible for the biggest amount of change, and yet quite often they're not given the biggest amount of power to do so. And then even within the system, they may not be seen, simply because they are a woman of color, as someone with power to do that as well. So there's so many different hurdles you have to get through. And I think it's wise to be strategic about how you think about your career. And, you know, similar to you, like I am in my space right now, heavily focused on a lot of D&I work, but that hasn't been how I got here. And, you know, people make decisions about where it is you want to go, how you want to get to where you want to. And you may discover along the way areas of interest that you could delve more into, but what you have to have is experience. You have to have, you know, the ability to be flexible. All of these things could be attained in different places. And if money is important to you, because you have to think of like, what's your value, right? And if money and stability and, you know, being able to pay a mortgage is important to you, because for some it's not, it might be something else, but if it's important to you, then you have to be strategic about how you decide to shape your career.
Well, and also money, one of the things we forget, if you're a woman of color and say a Black woman first lawyer in her family, we don't come to this alone. So we're turned to whenever something happens in the family. I was talking about this with one of my friends she's from a small town in the States. And the two of us were saying how different our experiences were from our colleagues, where they make all the money and they keep all the money. And we make all the money and we help pay for people's schooling, and we help, like we just finished helping pay for a cousin's wedding, and you know what I mean? Like we are constantly giving money back to the family because that's how our families operate. It's very different, I think, than, actually I know, because I'm being biracial. I will tell you, my white family, who are not wealthy people, like very poor people, lots of them just got out of living in trailers. Like that is our big accomplishment, is to get everybody out of a trailer. And they did that on their own. Like it's not the same where they would, I can't imagine one of my white cousins calling me and saying like, Del, this is happening. I'm going to go to school. I can use some money. When that doesn't happen. In my father's family, like in our Trinidadian family, people will ask for money and we're happy to give it. Like that is just, but it's just different. And in my husband's family, he's from Congo, it's a completely different system. Money just moves around the family. Money is like constant motion. And so you're putting money into that system and you don't necessarily get money out of the system. And so when we think that we got this great job that pays us like 6 figures, I think Rachel Rogers is, I don't know if anyone is familiar with her, but Rachel Rogers always says, like, she says, like, 6 figures ain't enough. Like, don't, you know, we're falling for the trap of like that 6 figures is going to be like, if you get that job, wow, your life is going to change. Yeah, more relatives might call you. That's how I feel about it. Like, you just have more responsibilities. And so, yeah, that's it. Bye, Marianne. But that is something that I think we are sold a little bit of a lie when we say like, oh, she's got such a great job.
Del, you hit on some great points there. When we think about historically speaking, for many of our communities, we are very communal versus an individualistic society. So like you said, those additional pressures that come when we are settled in our career or even building our career, right? Even before we get settled, but we've got the prestigious title, right? And you know, it's like, oh, she's a lawyer, oh, she's an educator. And it's like, yes, you are, and you've got these additional responsibilities that many don't even understand, carry, or walk with. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Yes, culture does matter, Karina, for sure. And that idea of having to pull yourselves up by the bootstraps versus, you know what, let's work let's work collaboratively to share our wealth, right? Accumulate wealth, which it takes time, right? So yeah, those
And
are
the difference between like finishing with a huge student loan and having no student loan, because like that was the reality of graduating from Osgoode Hall, was that like, and my student loan wasn't crazy. It did take me 10 years to pay off, but it was like maybe 40,000. One of my colleagues who went into D&I work, and I was like, are you nuts? Had $100,000 of student loan. And meanwhile, many of our colleagues had none, because they were great students and their parents like doted on them, and their parents were lawyers, and they hadn't worked before. It just had a very different experience, to the point I always talk about, like, you can measure the experience. One of my friends said to me, we were applying for the same type of jobs. He had all the interviews he could want. I had 2. He had like at least 20, right? He was turning down interviews when we were looking for articles. And I was like, JT, like, what's the difference? Like, why do you have all these interviews and I don't? And he's like, it might be my letter of reference from Jean Chrétien.
you think so?
I was like, oh, there's the privilege. Okay, like for once you could put a name, like I could put a name on the privilege that I did not have. Oh, so my lifeguard manager letter of reference doesn't have as much weight as your letter from Jean Chrétien. And we don't even realize like that is what we're competing against.
Yeah.
Like we're not part of that group most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, this is powerful. Did you want to jump in, Angela?
I was about to say that I think you're absolutely right when it comes to the references and the titles and positions that people hold. You know, very often, you know, that can sway, you know, the roles that people get and how quickly as well they're able to progress up the career ladder.
Thank you. Absolutely. I know our time is coming up pretty quick to the end. So before we wrap up, there's one question that I think will kind of tie in together when we think about what you've been through, your lived experiences, your values, your passions, you know, the work that you're currently doing. Is we want to know, what type of legacy do you want to be known for? So you both have children and you're doing this great work. Have you reflected on why you're doing this work and what legacy you would like to leave for them in particular, and then maybe, you know, those who are around you?
Yes, I think when I think about my legacy, I want it to be that, you know, when I've been working in the community, social services and public sector, that, you know, I have been a voice for the voiceless, for the vulnerable and for the marginalized, and that I am able to leverage, you know, my position and the things that I'm able to do to be able to create policy and programs and solutions that at the stroke of a pen are really going to be able to impact people, even if I don't know them or I never get to see them. I know that what I do will make a tangible difference. And so that is why one of the other things that I want to share with the group today, which is off the press, you know, I'm going to be taking my journey one step further in terms of my legacy. Because I am now going to be going to the province of BC as the Associate Deputy Minister of Housing, Construction Standards and Multiculturalism. And so, you know, I'm going to be able to really do some, you know, hopefully meaningful things to be able to help the BIPOC community in British Columbia. And I know that for all of you, you know, there's been lots of things that you've been advocating for and wanting to see change happen on. I'm not saying that I'm going to be able to achieve everything, but at least now you have somebody that looks like you at the table that can start to work on that good fight for you.
Wow.
Congratulations.
That's so awesome.
I feel a bit privileged that we got to hear about this.
I know. Breaking news. I love it. Thank you.
That's so
Del,
exciting.
what about
Okay, so
Yeah.
legacy is interesting because all my work is about legacy. So I work in gift and estate planning, and what I do is I work on people's gifts to the university to create legacies, right? So often I am helping people negotiate terms from the university for gifts that they think will make an impact. I think one of Shonda Rhimes describes someone like in my role as being like first only different, and I try to like embody that at least at UBC, of being like, I'm here and you need to deal with me, and I'm here and you still need to deal with me, and I'm here and you should deal with me the way you find me, and I'm not changing. And that's kind of the nice thing. I'm kind of getting stubborn and like, so you know, thank you, Prairie Mother, because my mom has like anchored me in this, that like, this is me, here I am, I have these issues, you need to deal with it. And so that is my role at UBC, for UBC. And I hope that I just leave that place a little bit better than when I found it. Just like, so that the next person isn't the first only different person. And I've been trying to encourage the idea of like cohorts, like subtly talking about like, wow, it'd be nice if we had a whole group of people that look different than us. And like planting seeds. That's all I do, is try and plant seeds and cause a ruckus, right? That's kind of my role, I feel, at UBC. In my own private law firm, I'm interested in everyday wealth. And even actually at UBC, I don't work with the fancy donors. I work with like the librarian who owned her house. I love like everyday wealth. I love the idea of everyday wealth. I think everyone can be wealthy in some way. And I believe that we can transfer our wealth, that generational wealth is important. And so my work is usually around like sending wealth down to the next generation. Like in essence, that's what a will is. And so, and planning around for emergencies to make sure that people's families are safe economically. So yeah, so basically I have money.
I think, you know, this idea of generational wealth is so important. And, you know, as someone with parents who immigrated here, you know, you have just that less time to actually build that up and then pass it down. And
yet our parents together built wealth. That's one thing, our families built wealth together.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Like together, right? So if the more that we can collaborate, as Shirley has talked about, probably in every single session has talked about collaboration, you know, the more successful we can be and the more we can really lift each other up. Yeah. So thank you for sharing your moments of wisdom. And thank you for sharing your amazing news, Angela. I think, you know, one of the things that is a thread in what both of you have said is around leaning into your authenticity, being like speaking up for who you are in this moment, what you need, and being unapologetic about that. And sometimes it takes time to get to that space, but we get there. So I want to thank you both for being here. Angela, I know that you have to leave soon.
Thank you.
So I want to get to you our signature question before you leave. And so our signature question is also tied to who Shelley and I are, and Del, this may be familiar to you as well. But our question is, would you characterize yourself in this moment as a red wine or white wine, or
a slow wine or a fast wine? And why?
So hailing back to some of the soca you might have heard when you came in.
So I think I see myself as a red wine because obviously I'm fruity, as you would say, and I would say that I'm a mixture of a slow and a fast wine. It depends on my mood or whatever it is that I'm trying to achieve.
Lovely.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. And Del, how about you?
Thank you.
Oh, I am, bye Angela. I am
Bye,
at the
Angela.
point where I am like an auntie one finger slow wine. Like I am like, come on, youngins, it's time for you guys to do the work. And like I support you, get out there. But yeah, you're not gonna see me on the road anymore.
Wonderful.
Those days are done.
Those days are done.
The knees are done. The knees are done. I could not wind down to the ground. You would have to lift me up.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, there's some days I'm a fast wine, but mostly a white wine, a slow wine. So
And wine gives me a headache now.
It's all situational for me. Depends if I need to be amp up my energy. I need some fast wine, you know, if I'm cleaning around the house, maybe. But other than that, yeah, I would say more of like a slow wine on my usual speed because I like to just take it easy, chill. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. We want to let you know how to continue to get in touch with us and connect with us. So please do so on Facebook, Instagram, or on LinkedIn as well. And we are posting these sessions on YouTube, so you can find us there. And again, you know, thank you so much, Del, for being a part of it. To Angela as well.
I wish I had news like Angela.
This, and yeah, you just can't thank you enough for being part of this conversation.
Thank you to our audience for their participation as well. We enjoy the engagement on the chat. So thank you so much. And we hope to see everyone next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.